Welcome to the Block Blanche live stream event. This is one you don't want to miss. It's the reason that Legal AF has decided to collaborate with Not Above the Law and bring you this special event. Over the course of the next hour, the case is going to be made against Todd Blanche to be confirmed as the Attorney General of the United States. We're watching the most corrupt Department of Justice in history, led by the most corrupt administration in history, a captured Department of Justice, one willingly captured by people like Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's former and likely current criminal defense lawyer. The confirmation hearing is over, but the hard work begins as that vote goes to the Senate floor. And on this live stream, you're going to hear from an amazing group of people, from elected officials and from activists and from people who every day are fighting to protect the rule of law and our democracy, and are going to teach you what you need to have as well in your toolbox to help them block Todd Blanche's vote. It's not just about listening. This is a participatory democracy. It's about understanding what you can do to help. And I'm so pleased to have our group here tonight. I just want to give you some highlights of who's going to be appearing tonight. We're going to have Senator Dick Durbin, Representative Ro Khanna, Representative LaMonica McIver, Lisa Gilbert, the co-president of Public Citizen, Lisa Graves, the president of True North Research and the co-founder of Court Accountability, Tracy Feint Love of Lawyers for Good Government, Norm Eisen, Democracy Defenders and Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, and Maya Wiley. You're not going to want to miss this. This is the time to act as we move towards the August 3rd vote. And I'm so honored to be in collaboration with Not Above the Law for it. And so I'm going to turn it over to the great and powerful Ashley Henderson, the co-executive director of the Highlands Research Center. And she'll take it from there to moderate tonight. Ashley, it's all yours.
Michael, we're so grateful to you and the Legal AF team. Thank you for hosting this stream. I'm Ashley Henderson, and I'm honored to be moderating tonight's conversation. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I also want to shout out the Not Above the Law Coalition for bringing this conversation, this urgent and critically important conversation, and this call to action together. This live stream is being shared across dozens of partner organizations and platforms right now. So if you're just joining us, wherever you're watching from,
A little
we're
headache.
so grateful
I'm gonna
that you're
try to work out.
tonight.
Laura asked me.
We're here to talk about something that shouldn't be a partisan issue, whether or not Todd Blanche is fit to serve as Attorney General of the United States of America. Todd Blanche spent years as Donald Trump's personal criminal defense attorney. And today, as acting Attorney General, he's running a Department of Justice that has indicted a former FBI director over a social media post. He's brought federal charges against a member of Congress for doing her job, gone after a 50-year-old civil rights institution, and presided over a $1.8 billion fund that critics call a slush fund for Trump's political allies. This all while continuing to stonewall on the Epstein files and disregard the survivors who have been courageously speaking out and calling for justice. Last week, he sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee for confirmation hearings to serve as Attorney General beyond his current acting capacity. What came out of those hearings, which we'll be discussing on this stream, should concern every single American, regardless of your political affiliation or party. Tonight, we've brought together people that you can trust, members of Congress, legal experts, civil rights leaders, people with direct experience on the receiving end of this administration's abuse of power to break down what's actually at stake. But before we dive in, the most important thing that you can do on this call and coming out of this call is to contact your senator and tell them to vote no on Todd Blanche, especially if you live in a state that's represented by a senator with a decisive vote in this confirmation. So if you live in Texas or North Carolina. If you live in Louisiana, Maine, Alaska, Utah, or Kentucky, I am talking to you. I need you to call your senator. If you don't live in one of those states, I need you to spread the word and I need you to call your senators as well. No matter where you live, you can go to blockblanche.org. Again, blockblanche.org. You're going to hear it over and over and over again tonight. And right now, you could go to that website, blockblanche.org, to plug into phone bank trainings that are going to be led by Common Cause. Those phone banks are going to reach voters in key states who need to contact their senators about why Todd Blanche absolutely should not be confirmed as Attorney General. Let's dive in. We're going to begin by hearing directly from 3 members of Congress who have been on the front lines of oversight and accountability work throughout this fight. First, from the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who led the questioning of Todd Blanche during last week's confirmation hearing, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois.
When we take our oath of office as members of Congress or the executive branch, we swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. The genius of this oath is that we pledge our loyalty not to a person, not to a political party, but to the principles that define America as a nation. It's clear that Todd Blanche does not feel the same way. Instead of leading the Justice Department on behalf of the nation, Mr. Blanche has used his position to help President Trump make this the most corrupt administration in history. Imagine, in the first year in office, almost $2 billion goes to the president. In May, Mr. Blanche worked with the president's private lawyers on a settlement agreement that would establish a nearly $2 billion slush fund to benefit the January 6 mob that attacked the Capitol, for goodness sakes. And he personally signed a document to provide President Trump, his family, and his businesses with immunity for any prosecution for violation of tax laws up to that date. At Mr. Blanche's confirmation hearing, he was asked if he would rescind the order creating the slush fund, rescind that immunity provision, condemn the pardons of cop beaters that invaded the Capitol. On each and every occasion, Blanche refused. Mr. Blanche also could not explain why he failed to recuse himself from his rollback of cryptocurrency enforcement. Every time you have a suspicious deal in Washington, look closely, cryptocurrency is involved in it. Despite the fact that he was personally holding over $150,000 worth of crypto assets, he cut down the regulation and policing of this industry. That is just plain wrong. The list of corrupt acts perpetrated by Mr. Blanche goes on and on, from his firing of career Department of Justice officials deemed insufficiently loyal to Trump to his cover-up of the Epstein files. Even with an administration full of yes men, Mr. Blanche stands out for his unquestioning willingness to do the president's bidding. Todd Blanche should not be leading the Department of Justice. America deserves better.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Next, from California's 17th District, a member of the House Oversight Committee who has been outspoken about the politicalization of federal law enforcement and played a truly decisive role in the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. You know him all too well, Representative Ro Khanna.
Hi, I'm Congressman Ro Khanna. Thank you to the Block Blanche Coalition for trying to stop Todd Blanche from becoming our Attorney General. Look, no one knows more than Thomas Massie and me about how much of an obstacle Todd Blanche has been to getting justice for the Epstein survivors. Todd Blanche is the reason that 3 million Epstein files still have not been released. Todd Blanche is the reason that there has not been a single investigation or prosecution for anyone who abused young women. I get texts every day from survivors. They're saying, why is Blanche not releasing the files? Why is Blanche not investigating or prosecuting people who raped us, who abused us, who trafficked us? We cannot have Todd Blanche as Attorney General. Please call your senators. Please stand up for the survivors.
And finally, someone whose story makes this fight personal. Representative LaMonica McIver of New Jersey's 10th District. Last year, Representative McIver was indicted by federal prosecutors after conducting congressional oversight at the Delaney Hall Immigration Detention Facility. Her case is a live example of exactly what we're here to talk about tonight. A Justice Department willing to prosecute its political opponents, including sitting members of Congress.
Last week, I attended Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I felt like I needed to be there because a little over a year ago, I stood outside Delaney Hall where that same man, Todd Blanche, gave a direct order to arrest my mayor and my friend, Ras Baraka. The chaos that came from mass and armed ICE agents charging into a crowd of peaceful protesters is now at the center of the case the Trump DOJ has brought against me for daring to stand up. Because of their charges against me, I am facing 17 years in prison. It's not normal, and it's not what happens in a democracy. What I am saying is this. What has unfolded for me since last May is unique in many ways, but it is not happening in a vacuum. And it is not just about me. It is not just about Democrats. It's not just about immigrants. It is about all of us. If the leadership of Trump's DOJ combined with ICE can manufacture chaos like what happened when armed ICE agents were sent into a crowd at Delaney Hall, and then prosecute elected officials like they are doing to me now, the implications extend far beyond this case. The Department of Justice is targeting political opponents, and with Todd Blanche in a position of power, those abuses will only continue. Trump's efforts to expand his own power and punish anyone who stands in his way is what an authoritarian does, not a president. While Todd Blanche spent much of last Wednesday making false claims, he did say one undeniable truth. He said, "I am Trump's lawyer." This is not the job. The Attorney General is the people's lawyer. Blanche will not serve the American people fairly and justly. He will not protect civil rights and liberties. He will only use his power to serve Trump and be his personal shield. He will not check the power of ICE, allowing them to continue filling our communities with violence and chaos. He will assist in the Trump family's unprecedented accumulation of power and wealth. He will bend rules and ignore guidelines for as long as he has the power to do so. The Justice Department exists to protect the American people and uphold the rule of law. Without a leader poised and willing to do so, the department will crumble, becoming a tool used by kings for kings. And let me remind you, in America, we have no kings. Todd Blanche should not be confirmed to this position. The Senate must reject his nomination.
Thank you to all three members of Congress for your work in Congress holding this administration accountable. Okay, y'all, now let's get into the rest of our speakers. Our first guest tonight co-chairs the very coalition that brought us together this evening. She's co-president of Public Citizen and co-chair of the Not Above the Law Coalition. Please welcome Lisa Gilbert. Lisa, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're so glad you're here. One of the key issues that was raised over and over and over again during the Blanche hearings is this corporate slush fund that we've mentioned tonight and permanent tax immunity for Trump. How did this $1.8 billion weaponization fund to reward Trump's enemies and corrupt protection for Trump actually come about?
It's a great question. It's a saga for the ages. It started out when Trump filed this bad faith lawsuit based on the leak of his tax returns. This was an action that occurred while he was president in his first term. He sought $10 billion in damages, which is a ridiculous number, no relationship whatsoever to any kind of reputational injury he might claim. The proof is that his reputation was not injured and he was subsequently elected president again. Then because the case involved Donald Trump on both sides, it could not and should not have proceeded. Lawyers at the IRS urged that Trump's claims be challenged in court, but they were ignored. The federal judge assigned the case had indicated her skepticism. But before the court could act, before we could throw out this absurdity, no DOJ lawyer ever appearing in court to contest Trump's claims, Trump and his own Department of Justice conspired to drop the case and agree to this out-of-court settlement, which created this $1.8 billion slush fund, which would make payouts to January 6th supporters, Trump cronies, maybe even Trump's family. The scheme, was the creation of a insurrection payment fund at best. And the DOJ also agreed that the government won't investigate or audit Trump's already filed tax returns, which crosses the line into illegality. This idea, it's absurd and it really hit a chord with the public. And I think because the idea of paying $1.8 billion in public money to Trump at the same time as Americans are just feeling this huge degree of economic distress, the administration is overseeing all these cuts to healthcare and food support and doing all of that on the grounds that the government just doesn't have enough money to pay for life-saving programs. So it just really hit home, I think, with regular folks. And now, no matter how many times Todd Blanche claims the settlement fund is gone, it still lives on. It lives on the DOJ website, and there's been no written agreement to end it.
Thank you so much for clarifying, Lisa. A U.S. district judge criticized this settlement slush fund. So why did that happen, and what did she say? How inadequate was Blanche's reaction to questioning on this point during the hearing?
Woefully. And yes, happy to unpack this. Just before Blanche came into the Senate for his confirmation hearing, U.S. District Judge Kathleen Williams ruled that President Trump's lawsuit, this ask for $10 billion from the IRS that was manufactured, which led to the settlement, was a sham. They said very clearly that this was something where because the DOJ and Trump were on both sides of this case, it was manufactured to justify this settlement. It was not brought to vindicate any kind of rights. It was brought to manipulate the judicial process and try to give benefits to Donald Trump. And it was just not something that should proceed because the parties were not adverse. The party, Donald Trump, was on both sides of this case. The abuse that she found was so severe that she ordered the bar to consider sanctions against Trump's attorneys, which includes Blanche. She ordered that the Trump and DOJ never again refer to this deal as a settlement. It's not a settlement. And she actually authorized anyone who'd filed a brief in the case, which includes us at Public Citizen, to seek attorney's fees for our wasted time. So it's pretty damning. During the hearing, Senator Cornyn questions Blanche, pretty sharply on the slush fund, as did others. And Blanche's response was that, the anti-weaponization fund is dead. But the underlying settlement agreement is still in place. It's an enforceable document. Cornyn pointed that out. The settlement agreement can only be changed if there's a written agreement from the parties, and that has not happened. And so that really means that because it's enforceable, Trump's counsel could enforce it. He could bring a breach of contract lawsuit at any point. So no matter what, Blanche tries to say, the slush fund is not dead, and Trump actually could bring forth a lawsuit on it, an additional one at any point.
Lisa, one more question. In your capacity as co-chair of the Not Above the Law Coalition, which has been tracking rule of law abuses across this administration for the last 2 years, right? Where does this Blanche nomination fit on the spectrum, on the continuum? Is this a break from precedent, or is it an escalation of something that's already been underway?
Well, thanks for that question. And yes, as you said, I co-lead the Not Above the Coalition, and we are, hundreds of organizations committed to protecting democracy, defending the rule of law. As a group, we've been working to explain the the assault that we're seeing. And I would say the nomination of Todd Blanche fits right into this bigger picture of corruption and lawlessness. We've seen attacks on judges, on the media, on universities. As we heard earlier from Rep. MacGyver, we saw the arrest of a sitting member of Congress for just doing her job. We've seen the militarization of cities without cause, court defiance, attacks on the First Amendment. The list is really endless and appalling. And I think, Todd Blanche fits right in. He should never serve as our attorney general because he's Trump's personal fixer. He's never stopped doing that job when he should be America's lawyer. That's what the head of the DOJ is supposed to be. So certainly he's unfit. And this abuse is right in line with the lawlessness and corruption of this administration.
Lisa, we are so grateful for your leadership, for the whole public citizen team who has been throwing down all across the country, saving lives. We're so grateful for every member of the Not Above the Law Coalition, and particularly your leadership of it. We appreciate you for being on tonight.
Thank you.
Remember, folks, this is a perfect opportunity for you to go to blockblanche.org right now to plug into ongoing phone banking happening nationwide to drive calls into key Senate offices. I need you to do it tonight. And if you've already done it, you're like, Ash, I took you seriously when you said it the first time. I need you to share it. I need you to share it, spread the word. If you've done it, I want you to tell us in the chat where you're watching that you have completed the task. Again, you need to go to blockblanche.org right now and plug into the ongoing phone banking work that's happening across the country right now to call our senators. Our next guest leads a coalition of more than 240 national organizations fighting for our civil rights. She's a people's attorney, y'all. She's a legal analyst and the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. I love her. Please help me welcome Maya Wiley. Maya, thank you for being here tonight.
Ashley, I am happy to be anywhere you are, and I'm particularly thrilled to be in this group of incredible leaders and friends, and just big shout out to Not Above the Law Coalition and everyone who is here for everything we are all doing to block Blanche's bullying.
Absolutely, absolutely. You, my dear, have spent years explaining these very complex, seemingly complicated legal and civil rights issues to people like me who are trying to do something about it, and to people who maybe disagree with us, but through your clarity are helping them see why these fights matter in plain terms for regular people. What's the real world harm when the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division stops functioning as a check on discrimination and instead gets redirected toward political targets?
Well, let's just start with the power of people to show up, cast a ballot, and decide who leads us. That's pretty basic. It's something we all need, want, and expect to be able to do in our democracy. And it's one of the charges of the Civil Rights Division, and one of the reasons the Civil Rights Coalition I'm so proud to lead, 76 years old, we fought for and won the Voting Rights Act of 1957 that created that division in order to ensure that there could be no discrimination against voters. There could be no gerrymandering and mapping to silence Black and Latino or Native American voters, and that we would not be blocked from the ballot because of how we looked or what our last names were or who we wished to cast a ballot for. And I say that because what we're seeing is in a leader like Todd Blanche, which I would call is not leading, but simply serving as a loyalist to a president, to say we will be a persecution office rather than a prosecution office. You heard it already from LaMonica MacGyver. We have a representative in Congress who was doing her job to protect the civil rights of people being detained in a facility. That is actually a power of Congress and of those members. The weaponization is not only using the power of persecution by investigating or bringing an indictment. So not only not protecting civil rights, but actually becoming a weapon, a sword against them to say we will investigate you and indict you if we don't like what you're doing, even if it is lawful. So whether that's a member of Congress that is saying, I'm going to make sure that people are safe in this detention facility. It's also turned against the Southern Poverty Law Center. Lisa Gilbert talked so eloquently about this slush fund. Let's talk about what Todd Blanche's leadership is actually helping to create. So not only are they saying, we will pay the foot soldiers of the insurrection that tried to interrupt the vote counting and certification of our votes. They literally said, we will go after and indict a storied civil rights organization that has been in partnership with the department to identify hate crimes before they happen, to try to save lives and protect lives. Tell me who in this country does not care about that? Secondly, they did it against, we've already seen them do a harassing investigation, criminal investigation against the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. Ohio, y'all, what do you hear when you hear Ohio? You should hear battleground state for voters. But rather than trying to earn votes, we're seeing an investigation against a coalition working for workers' rights and doing things like helping register Black voters to vote. And the intimidation and the threats are the point. It's an effort to say we as government will be a sword against your rights rather than a shield to protect them. And that's what Todd Blanche's leadership has represented. And trust and believe it will not stop at Black people. It will not stop at Latinos. It will not stop at Asians. It is people with disabilities. It is people who simply disagree and oppose positions of this administration and demand accountability. As we saw with those protesting ICE, we have seen protesters, peaceful protesters, indicted by this administration on domestic terrorism charges for exercising constitutional rights. This is all of us. This is everybody, and we can't let it stand.
I mean, I want you to go deeper there because, as you know, and as you've taught us, and as you've talked us through our own anxieties about the ways that the DOJ has attacked the civil rights sector and nonprofit organizations across this country. The DOJ seems fueled more by the administration's vendettas rather than the actual facts of the law, the rule of the law. I guess I have
judge
two
is
questions.
Saying that out loud, by the way, including a judge.
100%. It's not even like undercover.
No, it's not
right.
Undercover, and courts are saying it out loud.
Right. So tell me, I have two questions. I have a two-parter here. Like, what message do such weaponized prosecutions send to civil rights organizations and advocates? And even more importantly, what should our response be to the weaponization of prosecutions like this sent to civil rights organizations and advocates?
Well, the message is shut up, sit down, and be quiet, or be punished. And the response is we're going to be loud, we're going to be proud, and we're going to do the work. Because the law is the law that we created. It's the laws that we demanded. It's the laws that we have forebears that got beaten for, and you will not beat us back, and you will not stop us. And this is what, I just want to point this out, because I got this nice face today because I was on MS Now this evening because of the weaponization of the Department of Justice against the New York Times for doing reporting about Trump's Cotter gift of a jet that had serious national security issues attached to it. And in that case, and this is why I say it is about all of this, they're using the same tactics. But one of the things the New York Times said and did is, we understand what this is. This is an intimidation tactic to try to silence us. They're trying to silence lawyers. They're trying to stop lawyers from giving free legal services to people they don't like us. They are trying to tell colleges and universities that they can't protect students and they can't advance diversity, equity, or inclusion. They're trying to tell them what they can teach and what they cannot teach, and that includes history. And they're trying to tell all of us that everything we do, if it is not in lockstep and if they don't like it, might bring us punishment. And there's only one word for that, and it's tyranny. And there's only one answer to that, and it's we the people.
That's exactly right. My communities that already distrust federal law enforcement, Black communities, communities of color, Indigenous communities, immigrant communities, disabled folks, LGBTQ plus folks. Many of us watched this
People with
hearing.
disabilities are starting to worry about what they
Exactly.
can trust. 70 million
Exactly.
Americans are people with disabilities.
Exactly. Tell me what we should be taking from this hearing, just those very specific, targeted, and marginalized communities.
What we should be taking from this hearing, I hope, is how many brave people are willing to actually come into that room, sit down and tell their stories, including Epstein survivors, including the pardon attorney who was chased out of office and visited by U.S. Marshals because she wouldn't do the bidding and make a recommendation of pardon of a Trump friend. For folks who have been willing to speak out, like Department of Justice attorneys that Todd Blanche ran out because they did their jobs, FBI and line attorneys. There are so many people speaking up and out, including the civil rights organizations that are facing investigation or indictment. So all I can say is I hope, if nothing else, it shows that the resistance is real, it's strong, and it's about rights.
Amen to that. And, you know, I think there's so many folks that are on the call today that represent organizations. Some of them are in the Not Above the Law Coalition, some of them who is leading one of our most longstanding coalitions in the country. What coalition level strategy is needed if Blanche is confirmed and the DOJ continues down this horrible and terrifying path?
Well, the coalition and our coalition of coalitions like Not Above the Law, Democracy Defenders, so many others, we are both ready with the litigating groups being ready to litigate where necessary. We're continuing to organize, do the public education, and anytime there is an unfounded attack on an organization that comes from this Department of Injustice, as I'm calling it now, is that we are going to stand together and be loud. We're going to continue to do it for LaMonica MacGyver, but to be loud and be very clear about what it is and what we can do about it, ensure that communities are empowered and protected and know they still have rights and there's still people who will protect them. We will not stop.
Thank you for your clarity, the gift of your clarity, the gift of your leadership, for your courage. We appreciate your leadership. Thank you for being on with us tonight.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Y'all, we're going to keep on keeping on. Our next guest has spent his career on government ethics and accountability. He's a co-founder and board member of Democracy Defenders Action and a former U.S. ambassador and White House special counsel for ethics. Please welcome Norm Isom. Norm, welcome.
Hey, Ash, thanks for having me.
We're so grateful that you made time. You've built a career on government ethics enforcement. Walk us through why Mr. Blanche has done over the past year represents such a significant break from ethical norms.
Well, we'll talk about some of the specific failures, but the most fundamental one was revealed by Todd Blanche with a slip of the lip. His duty is to the United States. It is called the United States Department of Justice, not the Trump Department of Justice. Maybe they should change the name. They put a big picture out there. But Todd Blanche, when he was asked about his relationship with Trump by Senator Kennedy, he said, "I'm his lawyer." And he's corrected. He said, "I used to be his lawyer," but he told the truth. He accidentally committed truth. One of the few times that happened in the entire hearing. And if you look at the ethical rules, the shameful way he's behaved in the Epstein files matter, the failures to follow the law there, the treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell, the slush fund case. We litigated that case you and Lisa was talking about before, asking the Florida judge, reopen this case and throw it out. And that's what she did. The slush fund case. and so many other occasions, these terrible prosecutions, Ashley. People innocent, Tish James, Jim Comey being thrown out by courts or grand juries, so many others. And I've had the privilege to represent so many clients who are being wrongly targeted by this administration. They should call it, instead of the United States Department of Justice, Trump Department of Injustice. That would be a more accurate name, and that is not ethical. I think Ash may be frozen, so I'll continue. Yeah, I'll continue sharing some.
Hey, Norm, I can sub in for Ash while we figure out.
Okay, Rio.
And jump in with another question.
Sounds good. I was going to ask myself the questions and answer them.
We won't make you do that, Norm. I'll have one here while we work out Ash's issues. Let's talk about Judge Williams' order in Trump v. IRS. That order followed a brief that Democracy Defenders Fund filed, your organization, alongside former New Jersey
about that, Rio, is that those were bipartisan judges. So that we are not talking here about a group of former Democratic federal judges only. And like their fellow judges who still currently sit on the bench, who have been so strong at the trial court level in pushing back on the illegalities, including those overseen by Todd Blanche. These former federal judges spoke out and they said to the court, in essence, Donald Trump is on both sides of this case. The Constitution provides that you have to have a case or controversy. Well, the meaning of that is adversity, that you need to have two opposed parties. In similar cases to this one, where it was a DOJ contractor who released these Trump-related files, the Department of Justice has said statute of limitations passed. They didn't do that. They didn't even show up in court to defend the case. And it looked like Donald Trump was setting up an endowment for past insurrectionists, the people who committed violence on January 6th, his followers, and future ones. And if you combine the ability to make these payments to people who may do wrong things, violent acts even, together with the broad pardon of the presidential power, the broad presidential pardon power, it just didn't pass constitutional muster. And that's just what the judge found. She instructed sanctions in the form of fees. With Todd Blanche, she instructed the clerk to send her opinion to the New York State Bar, where he has his bar license. And there should be an investigation there of this activity. So that's what that case was about. And any attorney general nominee who blessed this unholy mess is totally disqualified. And I'll take the next question. Ash is back with us.
I think I'm back in action, y'all. This storm doesn't want to let me be great, but Norm, you are doing an incredible job of breaking this down. I'm looking at the YouTube chat on Legal AF, and I see some of my beloveds who are a little skeptical. They're like, there ain't no such thing as ethics under this administration. And I want you to tell me what legal and institutional guardrails still exist to constrain a DOJ this willing to pursue politically motivated prosecutions? Wow. Like, which ones has Blanche already tested and pushed against? And what is there still in existence that should give us any hope that ethics actually still matter in a time like this?
The one thing we have in that executive branch that Trump and Blanche have befouled, the one thing we still have is we have defectors, and like the chief counsel of the IRS, he left rather than agree to this slush fund deal. We had another senior IRS and Treasury official who just departed, with media reports that was because the Trump administration was going too far. There's a law, you can't use the IRS for retaliation. So you have defectors like that. It sounds an alarm. And then you have whistleblowers who are there, who I was proud, one of the first cases I did had represented FBI whistleblowers who talked about the atrocities going on at Todd Blanche's DOJ. But you can't really look for a lot in the executive branch. And unfortunately, Congress, led by MAGA majorities, has completely abdicated its normal oversight role. That leaves us with a safeguard, and I hope the people will feel encouraged when you look at the court record of stopping Todd Blanche. We're in court at Democracy Defenders Action and our sister organization, Democracy Defenders Fund. Every day, all day long, we have over 300 legal matters. In almost all of them, we are fighting with Todd Blanche's Justice Department, and he's losing, Ashley. Birthright citizenship with our team, the ACLU and others. We defeated him in the Supreme Court. I sat with other members of the council team, me from Democracy Defenders. I was next to my colleague, Anthony Romero from the ACLU, right behind Trump in court. And we saw the pain that these questions inflicted on him, and he left early. He couldn't handle the truth. Then, 24 hours later, with another wonderful team, we helped win the Dr. Lisa Cook case. Another administration official stood up to the president. Supreme Court held no, he can't fire her on bogus charges of wrongdoing, made up. And I could point to, we had our wins against corruption. It's not just the rule of law, corruption. We defeated Todd Blanche's DOJ on the Kennedy Center case, in addition to the slush fund case. We got, Donald Trump can't take the Kennedy Center. And then the third area we work in, elections. I'll give you one last one. We just quashed a Todd Blanche DOJ subpoena to criminally interfere in the Fulton County election apparatus before a judge, one of those brave judges. Guess who appointed him, Ash? Donald Trump in his first term. We quashed that subpoena. So Todd Blanche is losing. He's losing all the time. He's not fit to be attorney general. And I hope those wins and many more like them by us and our partners give hope to our viewers.
Norm, that context and your energy is exactly why we wanted you here tonight. Thank you for using every tool at your disposal to fight for us and our democracy. We appreciate you for being here tonight. Absolutely. Again, you can go to blockblanche.org. In fact, I absolutely need you to do it tonight, right now, so that we can get you plugged into the ongoing phone banking that's happening across this country to drive calls into key Senate offices. I need you to do that. I need you to spread the word. If you've already shared it with one person, I need you to drop it in a group chat. I need you to post it on your social medias. Use the hashtag blockblanche. We need to make sure that we have exhausted every bit of our energy to ensure that this man does not get through. Next guest has been watching the Justice Department from the inside out. She's previously served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Policy across two administrations, and now in her role at Court Accountability, which I am a huge fangirl of. And all of the other work she touches, she leads research into the actual machinery that is shaping our courts and our justice system. Please help me welcome Lisa Graves. Lisa, thank you for being here.
I'm honored to be here with these amazing speakers from the Not Above the Law Coalition and with you, Ash. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned in your intro, you've served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Policy in 2 different administrations, and you know the DOJ from the inside. Your research work digs into that machinery behind the judicial and DOJ nominees. What do we need to know about who's actually shaping Blanche's enforcement priorities behind the scenes?
Well, I wish I could say that it's a super complex web, but in fact, it's Donald Trump, Donald Trump, and Donald Trump. And you can see that from the actions that this administration has taken, that the Justice Department has taken, serving Donald Trump at every turn. And, you know, at the hearing last week, Todd Blanche talked about how, as a cabinet member, or if he were a cabinet member and confirmed, he would serve at the pleasure of the president. But it seems like Todd Blanche is really focused on pleasing the president. He doesn't seem to have the courage to say no to this president because he treats him like his client. He treats him like he's the law, like he's the United States of America. Trump is not. And the officials of the Justice Department and the staff basically take an oath to defend and protect the Constitution, not to defend a particular person. And so while there are people that Donald Trump favors and people Donald Trump disfavors, and that's shaping the priorities of the Justice Department, it's really Donald Trump. And this is so different from past administrations where there were rules and guidelines and norms about separating the prosecutorial power from the president. The president has not been directing prosecutions. No president has been doing so, certainly since the Nixon reforms. But this president, Donald Trump, the only criminal ever elected, convicted criminal, convicted felon ever elected to the White House, is directing that this Justice Department do his bidding, pursue his enemies, reward his friends. And that is, in my view, fundamentally corrupt.
Absolutely. Lisa, I want you to know you've got some fans in the chat that are grateful for you and talking about your excellence and sending you a lot of love. Your next question. So there are 2 Senate Republicans, Cornyn and Tillis, they're supposedly, reportedly still undecided. What does your research suggest is giving them pause?
Well, you know, I hope that it's the public pressure, and they need more. We need more calls going into their offices, more calls going into the offices of other members off the committee, like Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and others, to stand up to this outlandish circumstance of rewarding Todd Blanche for all of the things he's done so far with a promotion, rewarding him after how he handled and mishandled those Epstein files, how he protected the names of the predators and released the names of the survivors, how he has deployed over and over and over again the Justice Department to pursue Donald Trump's enemies. And then this non-settlement, this deal, this absolutely dirty deal that Todd Blanche couldn't be bothered to actually appear in court or have his attorneys appear in court in Florida in this IRS case. But nevertheless, he put his signature on the deal, giving Donald Trump immunity from civil prosecution, possibly criminal prosecution. It's so broad, quote, forever, from any of the claims that were brought to the Justice Department in the IRS suit or claims that were not brought. It is an extraordinary and outrageous thing. And he put his signature on that. Not only that, you can see how Todd Blanche has basically been shutting down and helping to shut down key components of the Justice Department in a whole range of enforcement areas while they prop up this notion that they're focused on fraud, while they're ignoring the biggest fraud that we are witnessing day in and day out, coming out of all this special treatment for friends of Trump, people who have donated to Trump, companies that have favored Trump through their CEOs or through the PAC or through the inauguration. What we're seeing is fraud before our very eyes, and we are seeing a Justice Department that is utterly failing to investigate those matters because, as others have pointed out, what we know is that Todd Blanche serves this president. He basically works for him, and not just in the technical sense. He thinks of him the way he described it in that Freudian slip, that he is Trump's lawyer.
That's right. That's right. He once argued in court that prosecuting his client, Trump, was vindictive and politically driven. And now he's DOJ's top law enforcement official indicting Trump's critics. What are your thoughts on how the Roberts Court's endorsement of unitary executive theory, and maybe break that down for us? How is that theory affecting what's happening at DOJ under Blanche, and what's the through line?
Well, what you have is an attorney general who's not acting independently. And in fact, in his questions to the Senate, the written answers, he conceded that he doesn't think the Justice Department can be independent or is independent. That was what he told Steve Bannon, and that's what he repeated. Because what Todd Blanche is doing is basically acting as if it's his job to say how high whenever, whatever Donald Trump says. And that is not the way the system is supposed to work. He should have the courage of, a baseline of ethics and morality to say no. Other AGs have said no to presidents. It doesn't seem like that's what's happening here at all. In fact, he's basically saying yes and more. I love you, sir, in essence, is one of the things he said. But what John Roberts has done is put a sort of veneer of legitimacy on this notion that the president controls every single component and element of the executive branch, that unitary executive theory is a pernicious theory that was invented during the Reagan administration. Now we have John Roberts trying to make it law by blessing the firing of the commissioner on the FTC, but in a broader language, basically suggesting that because the power of the executive vests in the president, that he controls everything. The president is not supposed to be controlling the prosecutions at the Justice Department. What's happened instead is that Todd Blanche has treated DOJ like it's the defense law firm for Donald Trump. He fired all of those prosecutors who worked on January 6 cases, along with agents. You know who he didn't fire? You know who Todd Blanche didn't fire? He didn't fire Jared Wise, who got a pardon from Donald Trump after he was facing felony charges for his role on January 6, where he was urging fellow rioters, kill him, kill him, kill him, to kill Capitol Police. That man, Jared Wise, was on the books in the Deputy Attorney General's office until just a few months ago. So Todd Blanche could fire anyone Trump wanted fired, meaning the prosecutors who prosecuted those January 6 violent insurrectionists. But you know who Todd Blanche didn't fire? Jared Wise. But more than that, and I'll just wrap here, this is a circumstance where we cannot entrust the power of the Justice Department to this man any further. He's proven over and over that he is unworthy of this position of public trust. And I think that we have to just make our voices heard, because the next step for Todd Blanche is to do whatever Donald Trump wants on the elections in these midterms. And so we cannot allow that to happen. We have to stand together, speak up and speak out, and we have to come together to defend and protect our right to vote this fall.
Lisa, thank you for your insight, for your tenacity. Thank you for reminding us that these calls to our senators aren't just some exercise in futility, that people power, that pressure on these Congress members is actually making a difference. That's the kind of context that you won't be anywhere else but on calls with leaders that you can trust like these. Lisa, again, thank you for being here with us. Y'all, we need you to make sure you are signing up to make these calls. So I want you to go to blockblanche.org right now and plug into the ongoing phone banking that's happening across the country, nationwide, to drive calls to key Senate offices. We need you to do that. Beloveds, we have one final guest that's built one of the largest volunteer legal networks in the country from the ground up. She's the founder and CEO of Lawyers for Good Government. Please welcome Tracy Fay Love. Tracy, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Ash. It's a privilege.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. Lawyers for Good Government organized more than 2,600 attorneys to oppose Todd Blanche's confirmation. Why has his nomination provoked such a broad response from the legal profession, including lawyers who don't necessarily share the same politics?
I think it's important to point out not only the 2,700 lawyers, but the fact that they came from all 50 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. And that's because lawyers across the country understand that this is not about partisan politics. It is about professional ethics and the rule of law. Our signatories include former prosecutors, public defenders, partners at some of the largest law firms in the world, solo practitioners at some of the smallest law firms in the world, retired judges, lawyers from across the ideological spectrum. We may disagree on policy, but we do agree on at least one thing, and that is the Attorney General should serve the Constitution and the American people. not the president. In fact, the attorney general should serve without fear of the president and without favor to the president personally. Todd Blanche has explicitly said he has no intention of doing that. In fact, just recently, he again rejected the idea that the DOJ should operate independently from the White House. That crosses a line that concerns all lawyers, regardless of political affiliation.
Thank you so much. And my understanding is that more than 10,000 federal lawyers have left government since the beginning of 2025, including roughly 1/5 of the Justice Department's attorneys. Tell me what this exodus, this seemingly mass exodus, tells you about the damage that's being done to DOJ as an institution.
It is a massive amount of damage. Institutions really are only as strong as the people willing to serve in them. And what we have seen is an absolute transformation in how lawyers think about the DOJ. It used to be career DOJ lawyers have historically viewed their service at the DOJ as the pinnacle of their legal career. It was highly competitive. It was an elite position to have. And we're now seeing so many of those attorneys leave because they can no longer do their jobs independently. And that is a huge loss, not just in terms of numbers, but we are losing decades of institutional knowledge, judgment, credibility, and of course the lawyers who are leaving because they want to be able to do their jobs independently. Those are exactly the lawyers we should have at a high functioning, a properly functioning Department of Justice. The DOJ functions best and really only functions when career attorneys know that they are expected to follow the facts and the law, not political directives. And unfortunately, that is not where we are today.
No, you're right. And I can imagine another consequence is the influx of less experienced lawyers to the DOJ. And I imagine that leads federal judges to increasingly criticize DOJ lawyers for having weak cases or making basic legal errors or even misconduct before grand juries. I have two questions for you in this tone. Like, how significant is it when judges begin openly questioning whether Justice Department attorneys can still be trusted to follow the law and tell courts the truth? And then secondly, if Blanche does get confirmed, what should everyday lawyers and the general public be doing to defend DOJ independence and the rule of law?
So the first part is it is extraordinarily significant that judges are openly questioning whether they can even trust Department of Justice attorneys to simply follow the law and tell courts the truth. Those are the two most basic things that any attorney has to do. We learned this week one, first year law school. You have to tell the truth and you have to follow the law. And unfortunately, judges now are seeing that that is not what DOJ lawyers are expected to do. It used to be judges would give DOJ attorneys the benefit of the doubt. They are expected to be candid, to be competent, to be guided by the law, not by politics. What we're seeing now is that that confidence has eroded, and that is harmful not just for individual cases, but for the credibility of the entire Justice Department. And to your second question, what if Blanche is confirmed? What should everyday lawyers be doing? I think just like federal judges are realizing they cannot rely on the DOJ, that they can presume that those judges or those DOJ attorneys are going to be following the law and telling the truth, we as lawyers in the United States are now going to have to realize that we simply cannot rely on having a DOJ that is independent from the White House. It will be, it already has become, and it will continue to be under Todd Blanche, both a sword to perceived political enemies of Donald Trump and a shield to protect his interests and his interests alone. So what I hope lawyers will do from here on out is continue to speak out more loudly when they see threats to the independence of our legal system, and to understand that our obligation as lawyers is not just to represent our individual clients' interests, but to represent the interests of justice and the American people as a whole. That is what we need to be doing as a profession.
Rio?
Thanks so much, Tracy. Stepping in because our dear friend Ash is having some technical issues again. She's in the middle of a storm, but thank you again so much. That should deeply worry all of us, regardless of what side of the aisle that we're on. And I just want to remind folks, I know Ash has been letting folks know, everyone watching at home right now, you can go to blockblanche.org to plug into ongoing phone banking that's happening nationwide to drive calls into key Senate offices to oppose the confirmation of Todd Blanche. We're coming into the close of our program tonight. I just want to first thank everyone who joined us tonight. Senator Durbin, Representative Khanna, Representative McIver, Lisa Gilbert, Maya Wiley, Norm Eisen, Lisa Graves, Tracy Fate Love. Again, thank you. Thanks everyone watching at home tonight. You've heard from members of Congress, ethics experts, civil rights leaders, and legal advocates. Every one of them told us the same thing in a different way. Todd Blanche should not be confirmed as Attorney General of the United States. But this fight doesn't end when this stream does. The Senate could vote on this confirmation very soon, and a handful of undecided senators are the ones who will decide it. That means your voice right now matters a huge amount. Before we go, I want to turn it over to one more voice, someone who's going to tell you exactly how you can take action tonight, and whose organization has set up those phone banks that we've been plugging throughout the call at blockblanche.org. I'd like to kick it over to our colleague at Common Cause, the president and CEO of Common Cause Virginia, Case Sullivan, for a brief message from her.
Hi everyone, it's Virginia here with Common Cause. You may know us as the People's Lobby. I was in the room during Todd Blanche's confirmation hearing last week, and as somebody who has watched many hearings like this over the years, I really expected Todd Blanche to answer for his actions, to answer for the slush fund, for the Epstein files, for the fact that he's still acting like Trump's personal lawyer. And of course, you and I both heard his Freudian slip where he said he was still Trump's lawyer, right? I heard it. And when it comes down to Blanche, he refused to take any accountability for his corrupt actions. And that's just not the type of person we want leading the Department of Justice. The hearings are over, but the fight to block Blanche isn't. Common Cause is leading weekly phone banks, so senators hear from us on Blanche's nomination. And we've driven more than 20,000 calls so far, but our lawmakers need to keep hearing from us. Please join our phone banks to connect with people in priority states, urging them to call their senators and to tell them no on Blanche. It's more important than ever that the government hears our voice. The link to sign up is here. It only will take a few minutes of your time to make a difference. And together, we're in this fight, and with your help, we will win.
Thank you so much, Virginia, and thank you all for being here tonight. This is a moment that calls for all of us. Pick up the phone, make the calls, share this stream, and let's make sure Todd Blanche is not confirmed to lead the Department of Justice. Good night, everyone.